Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back to a time and place that you think you know, but probably don't. The American Wild West. Now, I know what you are picturing. Heroic figures in dusty hats, dramatic standoffs at high noon, and sweeping golden landscapes. But tonight, we are peeling back that romantic Hollywood veneer to uncover the gritty, uncomfortable, and frankly, pretty gross reality of daily life. The truth is, for the average person, just surviving a single day was a monumental achievement. You'd be less concerned with quick drawing a pistol and more concerned with where your next clean glass of water was coming from. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly means the world. And while you are at it, let me know in the comments what city you are listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey doesn't begin in a dusty saloon or on a galloping horse. It begins in a place like Independence, Missouri, a jumping-off point for the great westward trails. Forget quiet anticipation. Picture instead a chaotic, churning mass of humanity. The air is thick with the smell of livestock, unwashed bodies, and a strange, electric mix of hope and desperation. You see families selling everything they own to buy a wagon and a team of oxen. You hear the sharp crack of a whip, the lowing of cattle, the shouts of merchants hawking everything from miracle tonics to overpriced flour, and the nervous chatter of thousands of people about to gamble their lives on a 2-mile trip. You've purchased your wagon, a Conestoga or, more likely, a smaller, lighter version often called a prairie schooner. It looks sturdy enough, but your first lesson in Western survival is a disappointing one. You won't be riding in it. The wagon is packed to its canvas brim with the essentials for starting a new life. Sacks of flour, barrels of salted pork, tools, seeds, a cast iron stove, and maybe one small trunk with your most precious belongings. There is no room for passengers. So, you walk. You, and almost everyone else who is able, will walk the entire way from the Missouri River to the Pacific coast. The wagon is for supplies, the sick, and the very young. For you, the journey is on foot. The first few days are a blur of mud and monotony. The wagon wheels, which you thought were so strong, sink into the deep ruts of the trail, and you spend hours pushing and pulling, your shoulders aching. The iconic image of a neat line of wagons trekking across a pristine prairie is a fantasy. The reality is a sprawling, disorganized caravan, sometimes miles wide, as everyone seeks out less rodden ground to avoid the dust and mire churned up by those ahead. The pace is agonizingly slow, about 2 miles an hour, the same as a walking human. Day in and day out, you see the same landscape, the same canvas wagon cover, the same backs of the oxen plodding in front of you. One of the strangest sights you encounter is the debris left by those who came before. The trail is littered with abandoned treasures. People would overload their wagons at the start, only to realize weeks into the journey that their exhausted animals couldn't manage the weight. You walk past beautifully carved rocking chairs, heavy oak dressers, and even cast iron stoves, half sunk into the prairie soil like monuments to miscalculation. One of the most commonly abandoned items, believe it or not, was books. That heavy family Bible or set of Shakespeare plays became an anchor, a luxury that survival could not afford. Historians have found journal entries detailing the heartbreaking choices people had to make, leaving behind heirlooms on the side of the trail for the sake of a few less pounds for their animals to pull. The real dangers of the trail are not what you expect. It's not the dramatic bandit raids or large-scale battles you've seen in movies. The greatest threat is a simple accident. Falling from the wagon and being run over by its heavy, iron-rimmed wheels is a distressingly common cause of death, especially for children trying to catch a brief ride. Another mundane but lethal danger is crossing rivers. There are no bridges. You caulk the seams of your wagon bed, hoping to float it across, while the panicked animals swim and pull. Many lose their wagons, their supplies, and their lives in the swirling currents of a river that looks deceptively calm. And what of the Native Americans? The figures so often depicted as the primary antagonists in this story. The truth is far more complex, and it's a subject that historians still actively debate. For much of the migration period, especially in the early years, interactions were often peaceful and based on trade. Tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne frequently saw the wagon trains as a mobile marketplace, trading food, offering guidance, or demanding tolls for passage through their lands. While conflict certainly existed and grew more frequent and violent as the number of immigrants swelled and resources became scarce, the Hollywood image of constant, unprovoked warfare is a significant exaggeration. You are far more likely to die from cholera contracted from a contaminated water source than from an arrow. As you walk, tired, dusty, and already thinner than when you started, you realize the West isn't about fighting villains. It's about fighting for your next step, your next meal, and your next clean drink. Ahead, the vast, unforgiving plains stretch out to an endless horizon. After weeks, maybe months, of grueling travel, you finally see it on the horizon. Your destination, not a glittering city, but a frontier town, emerging from the dust and haze. Your first deep breath of civilization is a shock. The air is not fresh. It's a thick, potent cocktail of smells, and none of them are pleasant. The dominant scent is mud, not the clean, earthy smell of petric or after a rainstorm, but a foul, churned up ooze mixed with something else. It's the smell of horse manure, pig slop, and human waste, all baked together by the unrelenting sun. The main street, and likely the only street, isn't paved with cobblestones or even neatly graded dirt. It's a quagmire. You step off the dry, cracked prairie and your boot sinks 6 inches into a viscous, brown muck. This isn't just mud. It's a repository for everything the town discards. People toss their trash from their windows, food scraps, animal bones, broken pottery. Businesses do the same. The butcher shop throws out gristle and blood. The tannery discards foul-smelling scraps. And the saloon ejects its nightly collection of broken glass and a whole lot else. There are no sanitation departments, no garbage collection. The street is the town's communal dump. You see pigs, dogs, and chickens wandering freely, rooting through the filth, acting as the town's unofficial and highly inefficient cleanup crew. They are, in a strange way, a vital part of the ecosystem. You try to navigate this treacherous landscape, hopping from one slightly raised plank of wood to another. These boardwalks are a primitive solution to the mud, but they are often broken, uneven, and slick with grime. A step doesn't just mean a dirty boot. It means stepping into a stew of unimaginable filth. The noise is a constant. Grating assault, the gentle sounds of the prairie, the wind, the rustle of grass, are replaced by the cacophony of progress. Hammers clang on anvils at the blacksmith's shop. Saws screech at the new construction site of yet another hastily built wooden storefront. Men shout, dogs bark, horses whinny, and from the open doors of the saloons, you hear the tinny, out-of-tune plinking of a piano. punctuated by bursts of loud, drunken laughter or the sharp, angry tones of an argument. There is no zoning, no quiet residential area. The blacksmith might be right next to the hotel, and the tannery next to the general store. It's a chaotic jumble of noise and smells, all crammed together. You look at the buildings. They are not the charming, weathered structures of Western films. They are raw, slapped together affairs of unpainted, rough-cut lumber. Many are just false fronts. Thorough, flat facades designed to make a one-story shack look like a grand, two-story establishment. It's all about illusion, an attempt to project a sense of permanence and prosperity that doesn't really exist. The gaps between the wooden planks are wide enough to see through, offering little protection from the wind, the dust, or the cold. Here, you encounter a strange, cold piece of frontier etiquette. People don't make much eye contact. In the teeming, anonymous cities of the East, you could walk by 1,000 strangers and feel invisible. Here, in a town of maybe a few hundred, the lack of acknowledgement feels different, more personal. It's not necessarily hostility. It's a kind of wary caution. Everyone is a stranger, and no one knows who can be trusted. A friendly face might belong to a swindler, a claim jumper, or just someone who will ask you for a loan you can't afford to give. People maintain a protective bubble of reserve. This social reality is a stark contrast to the myth of the warm, tight-knit frontier community. That might come later. But for now, the town is just a collection of suspicious individuals, all trying to carve out their own piece of fortune. One of the more peculiar things you notice are the advertisements. Not for products, but for people. Pinned to the door of the general store or the post office are handwritten notices from individuals looking for lost relatives who were supposed to meet them here, or from women back east seeking information about husbands who went west for gold and weren't ever heard from again. It's a public bulletin board of private heartbreaks, a testament to how easily people could simply vanish in this vast, disconnected landscape. The question of how these early towns were even governed is a matter historians are still untangling. In the very beginning, formal law was often non-existent. Order might be maintained by a loose consensus of the most powerful merchants, or by an impromptu miners' court. Sometimes, a town would simply appoint or hire the toughest man around to act as a town marshal. But his authority was based purely on his personal reputation and his ability to intimidate. The idea of a formal, elected sheriff with a clearly defined jurisdiction and legal backing would often come much later. For now, justice is a very fluid and often violent concept. As you pull your boot from the muck with a wet, sucking sound, you realize the journey is far from over. Surviving the trail was one thing. Surviving the town will be a whole different kind of challenge. Now that you've arrived in this chaotic frontier town, your next pressing need is shelter. You need a place to live, a roof over your head to protect you from the elements. The grand, two-story ranch house with a sprawling porch is a dream for another lifetime. If you are lucky, your reality is something far more primitive and, frankly, much dirtier. Your options are limited, and neither is particularly appealing. You can either build a log cabin or, if you are on the vast, treeless plains, a side house. Let's say you've settled in a place with enough trees, like the foothills of the Rockies. You decide to build a log cabin. This isn't the charming, perfectly fitted Lincoln log cabin of your childhood fantasies. First, you have to fell the trees yourself. This is backbreaking, dangerous work with a simple axe and maybe a two-man saw if you are fortunate enough to have a partner. You spend days, weeks, swinging the axe, your hands blistering, and then call low using, your back screaming in protest. Once the trees are down, you have to cut them to length and notch them so they can fit together at the corners. This requires a skill you likely don't have. So, your first attempts are clumsy. The logs don't sit flush. There are large, irregular gaps between them. You raise the walls, log by heavy log, in a process that is both exhausting and precarious. A single slip could mean a crushed limb. Once the walls are in, you have to fill those gaps. This process is called chinking. You wedge whatever you can find: moss, mud, dried grass, even scraps of cloth, into the spaces between the logs to keep the wind and drain out. It's an imperfect seal at best. On windy nights, you'll feel drafts snaking their way into your small space, and fine dust or snow will filter through the walls, settling like a fine powder on everything you own. The floor. It's just the packed earth you built the cabin on. Maybe you will be ambitious enough later to lay down some rough-hewn planks. But for now, you live on dirt. The roof is another challenge. You lay a framework of smaller logs or poles and cover it with whatever you can: bark, packed earth, or layers of sod. This roof will leak, not just during a heavy downpour, but for hours or even days after the rain has stopped, as the water slowly seeps through the packed dirt, dripping a muddy slurry onto your bed, your table, and into your food. A common, grim joke of the time was that you could stay drier outside in the rain than inside your own cabin. But what if you are on the plains of Kansas or Nebraska, where trees are as rare as a friendly bank? Your only option is a soddy or sod house. This is, quite literally, a house made of dirt. You use a special plow to cut the prairie turf into long, brick-like strips. These sod bricks are heavy, held together by the dense root system of the prairie grass. You lay them grass side down, stacking them like giant, earthy bricks to build your walls. It's grueling work. A single sod brick can weigh over 50 pounds. Your new home, once finished, looks like a small, green hill rising from the prairie. It has some surprising advantages. The thick, earthen walls, often 2 or 3 feet thick, provide excellent insulation. The house is cool in the scorching summer, heat and relatively warm in the bitter winter. But the downsides are significant. Your home is alive. It is a haven for snakes, mice, spiders, and all manner of insects that burrow into the earthen walls and ceiling. It's not uncommon to wake up with a snake coiled in the rafters above your bed, or to have beetles and dirt clumps drop into your soup as you cook. And the rain. In a sod house, a rainstorm is a domestic disaster. The roof, also made of sod, absorbs the water like a giant sponge. It becomes heavy and saturated, and then it begins to leak. But it doesn't just drip water. It drips a thick, brown, muddy ooze that stains everything it touches. Women would hold umbrellas over their cooking pots and their beds during a storm, trying to protect their food and sleeping areas from the relentless mud. A little-known fact is that sometimes a new sod roof would sprout. The dormant seeds in the turf, now watered, would begin to grow, and you might find wildflowers or prairie grass growing on your ceiling. It sounds almost poetic, until you realize it's just another sign that you are living inside a pile of dirt. Historians still debate the psychological impact of living in such conditions. Some accounts speak of the pride people took in making these crude shelters into homes, with whitewashed interior walls and carefully tended curtains. But many other diaries and letters, particularly from women, describe a profound sense of depression and claustrophobia, a feeling of being buried alive in the vast, empty landscape. This prairie madness, as it was sometimes called, was a very real affliction. born from the crushing isolation and the grim reality of living in a house that was constantly trying to crumble back into the earth it came from. As you lie down to sleep on your straw-stuffed mattress on the dirt floor, listening to the skittering sounds within your walls, you realize home is not a place of comfort. It is just another front in your daily battle for survival. You wake up in your dark, damp shelter, a persistent, dull thirst in the back of your throat. The first and most crucial task of your day is securing water. It's the one thing you absolutely cannot live without. Yet in the American West, it's one of the most treacherous things you can consume. The romantic image of the lone cowboy kneeling by a crystal-clear stream, cupping his hands to drink, is a deadly fantasy. In reality, finding and consuming safe water is a constant, life-or-death gamble. Your primary water source in a growing frontier town is likely the same one everyone else uses, the nearest river or creek. This sounds simple enough, but you have to consider the context. This isn't a pristine mountain stream. This is a waterway that serves as the town's everything. Upstream from where you are dipping your bucket, someone is likely watering their livestock. Their horses and cattle are standing in the water, relieving themselves. A little further up, the local laundry woman might be washing clothes. The light from hers opened the dirt from the garments swirling into the current. The town's small slaughterhouse, if it has one, probably discards its blood and offal directly into the river. And every single outhouse, every privy pit in the entire town, is dug into the same soil that leaches its contents directly into the groundwater, which in turn feeds the creek. You are, in essence, drinking from a communal toilet. You fill your bucket with the murky, brownish water. You can see things floating in it, bits of debris, unidentifiable specks. You let it sit for a while, allowing the heaviest sediment to settle to the bottom. But you know it's not really clean. You might try boiling it, if you have the time and the fuel. This is the single most effective thing you could do to protect yourself. But it's not common knowledge. The germ theory of disease is still a new, radical, and largely unaccustomed idea in the mid to late 19th century. Most people believe that diseases are caused by miasma, or bad air, foul smells that rise from swamps and filth. So you might hold your nose while you drink the water, thinking that will help. It won't. The consequences of this contaminated water are swift and devastating. The West was ravaged by diseases that are now rare in the developed world, thanks to modern sanitation. The most feared of these was cholera. It was a terrifying illness. A person could wake up feeling perfectly healthy and be dead by nightfall. Cholera caused extreme diarrhea and vomiting, leading to rapid dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and shock. The victim's skin would turn bluish-gray. Their features would become pinched and sunken, and they would suffer from agonizing muscle cramps. The rapid spread of cholera through a town was the stuff of nightmares, and it came directly from the water. An infected person's waste would contaminate the water supply, and everyone who drank from it would be at risk. Entire towns could be decimated in a matter of weeks. Then there was dysentery, often called the bloody flux. It was a constant, miserable companion for many on the frontier. It was an inflammation of the intestine, also caused by bacteria in the water, resulting in severe abdominal pain and bloody diarrhea. It was debilitating and often chronic, leaving its sufferers weak and vulnerable to other illnesses. Typhoid fever was another waterborne killer, a bacterial infection that caused a high, sustained fever, headaches, and weakness. It was less explosive than cholera, but it was a slower, more insidious strain on a community's health. One of the more surprising sources of contamination, something you might not even consider, was the very bucket you used to collect the water. A little-known fact is that many household items, including buckets, plates, and cups, were often coated with a lead-based glaze. This glaze could leach lead into the water or food, especially if it was acidic. Chronic, low-level lead poisoning would have been a common, and diagnosed ailment, causing a host of symptoms: abdominal pain, developmental delays in children, and neurological issues like irritability and confusion. People would have just called it feeling poorly, never knowing they were being slowly poisoned by their own kitchenware. The science behind water purification was in its infancy, and its practical application on the frontier was virtually non-existent. Historians still analyzed diaries and letters to understand how people perceived these diseases. Was it God's will, a moral failing, or just bad luck? The connection between the dirty water they drank and the deadly sickness that followed was not clearly understood by the majority of the population. There was a general sense that summer sicknesses were just a part of life, a seasonal hazard to be endured. Some people might have intuitively known that water from a well was safer than from a river, but even wells were often dug too close to latrines and were easily contaminated. As you take a hesitant sip of the tepid, slightly gritty water from your cup, you know that this simple act could be the beginning of the end. Every drink is a roll of the dice. After your risky morning drink, nature inevitably calls. This brings you to one of the most unpleasant, unglamorous, and dangerously overlooked aspects of 19th century life: waste disposal, or, more accurately, the almost complete lack thereof. In your modern world, this is a private, sanitized, and thoughtless process. In the Old West, it is a public, feral, and hazardous affair that contributes directly to the cycle of disease you just gambled with. Forget pristine outhouses with crescent moons carved into the door. The reality is far grimmer. Your first encounter with a frontier restroom is likely a communal privy or outhouse. It's a small, rickety wooden shed, often shared by several families or an entire boarding house. As you approach, the smell hits you first, a pungent, overwhelming stench that seems to cling to the air around it. The structure itself is flimsy, with gaps in the walls that offer little privacy or protection from the elements. Inside, it's dark. The toilet is a simple wooden bench with one or more holes cut into it. Beneath the holes is a pit, dug directly into the earth. This pit is the beginning of the problem. It's rarely, if ever, emptied. When it gets full, the common practice is not to clean it out, but simply to move the shed to a new spot and dig a new pit, covering the old one with a thin layer of dirt. Over time, the ground around any long-standing settlement becomes a minefield of old, decomposing cesspit. The waste in these pits does not stay put. It leaches directly into the surrounding soil, contaminating the groundwater. The town well you thought might be a safer option than the river. If it's dug within 100 feet of one of these pits, and it almost always is, it's drawing from that same contaminated aquifer. You are, quite literally, drinking your neighbor's sewage from a week ago. There are no regulations about where these can be built. They are often placed wherever is convenient, right next to kitchens, wells, and public spaces. The fly population is biblical. The pits are a perfect breeding ground, and the flies travel indiscriminately from the filth of the outhouse to the food sitting on your table, carrying unimaginable bacteria with them. They are not just a nuisance. They are a primary vector for transmitting diseases like typhoid and dysentery. In many of the rougher, more temporary mining camps or new settlements, even a communal outhouse is a luxury. In those places, people simply use a designated gully or ravine on the edge of town. Or they might just walk a polite distance away from their own dwelling. There is no system, no sanitation, just the hope that rain will eventually wash it all away, usually into the same creek everyone drinks from. The concept of separating human waste from the living environment is completely foreign. A particularly strange and little-known detail of 19th century sanitation is the night soil man. In more established eastern cities, and eventually in some of the more developed western towns, this was a real profession. These men would come around late at night with a cart and buckets to empty the pits of privison, the chamber pots from people's homes. It was a foul, low-status, but necessary job. However, on the raw frontier, this service is a distant dream. You are your own night soil collector. Inside your cabin, you have a chamber pot, usually a simple ceramic or metal pail, for use during the night to avoid a treacherous trip to the outhouse in the dark. In the morning, it's your responsibility to empty it. You do what everyone else does. You open your door and fling the contents into the street. Imagine a street scene in the morning. People from every house emerge, pots in hand, and casually toss a slurry of human waste into the already filthy thoroughfare. This practice contributes to the thick, foul mud you had to navigate on your first day. It's why you see pigs and dogs foraging in the streets. They are eating this refuse. The academic term for this is fecal oral route transmission of disease, and you are living in a perfect demonstration of it. Historians who study sanitation practices often point out the class-based nature of hygiene. Wealthier homes might have a more private, slightly better maintained privy further from the house. But ultimately, in a world without a functioning sewer system, everyone was living in close proximity to the same filth. No amount of money could fully protect you from the contaminated water or the disease-carrying flies. The debate among medical historians continues about how aware people were of the danger. Some doctors and reformers of the era were beginning to make the connection, writing pamphlets about the importance of civic cleanliness. But their voices were often drowned out by the sheer difficulty of survival. Digging a deeper well or building a better outhouse was a low priority when you were worried about finding food for the day or keeping your roof from collapsing. As you hold your breath and use the town's revolting privy, you understand that the West's most formidable enemy isn't an outlaw with a gun. It's the invisible world of microbes, thriving in the filth that civilization itself has created. After navigating the treacherous worlds of water and sanitation, your thoughts turn to food. Your stomach is rumbling, a reminder that survival depends on calories. But put aside any notions of sizzling steaks cooked over a campfire or hearty stews bubbling in a saloon. The daily diet of an average person in the West is monotonous, bland, and often nutritionally deficient. Securing and preparing food is a relentless, time-consuming chore. Your daily menu is built around 3 core ingredients, the so-called trinity of the Trailand frontier home: bacon, beans, and bread. Let's start with bacon. This isn't the crispy, thin-sliced delicacy you might enjoy for breakfast. This is salt pork, a slab of fatty pork belly that has been heavily cured in salt to preserve it for months, or even years, without refrigeration. It's incredibly salty, so salty, in fact, that you have to soak it in water for hours before it's even remotely palatable. Assuming you have the extra water to spare, it's tough, greasy, and provides a crucial source of fat and calories. But it's far from a culinary delight. You'll eat it fried for breakfast, chopped up into your beans for dinner, and you'll use the rendered grease to cook almost everything else. Next are the beans. Pinto beans are a staple. They are cheap. They last forever when dried. And they are filling. You will have a pot of beans simmering over your small fire or stove almost constantly. They are boiled for hours until they turn into a thick, mushy stew. If you are lucky, you might have some wild onions or chili peppers to throw in for flavor. But most of the time, they are just plain, bland, and starchy. You eat them for dinner, and you eat the leftovers for breakfast the next day. It's a reliable source of protein, but the lack of variety is mentally taxing. Finally, there is bread. This isn't a light, fluffy loaf from a bakery. You make it yourself, and it is a simple, unleavened bread, often called hardtack or bannock. It is a basic mixture of flour, water, and salt, maybe a little bacon grease for richness, cooked in a skillet over an open fire or in a cast iron Dutch oven. The result is a dense, tough, cracker-like bread. On the trail, it was often baked in large batches and was so hard it could reportedly stop a bullet. You might have to break it with a rock or soak it in your coffee to make it chewable. Another common variety is cornbread or Johnny cakes, made from cornmeal, which is often cheaper and more readily available than wheat flour. What about fresh fruits and vegetables? They are an almost unheard of luxury, unless you have managed to cultivate your own garden. A difficult and uncertain ask in harsh climate and poor soil. Your diet is severely lacking in essential vitamins. This leads to a host of nutritional deficiency diseases. The most famous of these is scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C. You might associate it with sailors on long sea voyages, but it was rampant on the frontier as well. The symptoms are grim: bleeding gums, roost teeth, swollen joints, and extreme fatigue. A person could be slowly and painfully incapacitated by the lack of a single nutrient. Hunting might supplement your diet. If you have the skill, the time, and a good dose of luck, you might bring back a rabbit, a squirrel, or if you are very fortunate, a deer or an antelope. But this meat has to be dealt with immediately, without refrigeration. You have to eat what you can and then preserve the rest by cutting it into thin strips and drying it in the sun to make jerky, or by heavily salting it. Game could be a feast, but it's an unreliable source of food. One of the more peculiar food items you might encounter is prairie butter. This isn't butter at all. It was a euphemism for the thick, greasy, and often rancid bacon fat that was left over after cooking. It was stored in a can or jar and used as a spread for hardtack or as a cooking fat. The taste could be incredibly strong and unpleasant, but it was a source of calories that couldn't be wasted. The quality of the food you could buy at the general store was also highly suspect. There were no food safety regulations. Flour was often cut with cheaper substances like chalk or plaster dust. Coffee beans were mixed with roasted acorns or chicory. Sugar might be mixed with sand. A historian once noted that adulteration was the rule, not the exception. You paid a high price for goods that had been shipped for thousands of miles, and you never really knew what you were getting. The debate among historians about the frontier diet often revolves around its long-term health impacts. While the high-calorie, high-fat diet was necessary to fuel the hard physical labor required for survival, the lack of vitamins and the sheer monotony must have taken a toll, not just physically but mentally. The constant craving for something fresh, something sweet, something different, is a recurring theme in diaries from the period. As you sit down to your evening meal, a plate of mushy beans, a greasy slice of salt pork, and a piece of bread so hard it makes your jaw ache, you realize that eating is not about pleasure. It is about fuel, and you wonder how many more meals like this you can endure before your body, or your spirit, begins to break down. One day, you slip while chopping wood, and the axe lays open a deep gash in your shin. The pain is sharpened immediate, but your second feeling is a cold, gut-wrenching fear that has nothing to do with the injury itself. You need a doctor. But the man you are about to visit is a far cry from the trusted medical professional you might imagine. In the American West, medicine is a primitive, brutal, and often deadly affair. The person you seek out for healing is just as likely to kill you as to cure you. You limp your way to the establishment of the town doctor. His office might be a small room in the back of the general store, or perhaps he operates out of the same building as the barber. In fact, he might be the barber. The red and white striped barber pole we see today is a historical relic of this connection. The red representing blood, the white representing bandages, a symbol of the barber surgeon of medieval times, a tradition that lingered on the frontier. This man has likely had no formal medical training. He might have apprenticed with another doctor for a few months, or simply read a few medical books. Or perhaps he just bought a set of tools and declared himself a physician. There are no licensing boards, no regulations, no way to verify his qualifications. His office is dimly lit and smells of stale tobacco, whiskey, and something vaguely metallic. His medical instruments are laid out on a dirty cloth. You see a collection of saws, knives, and probes, all made of unsterilized steel. He picks up a probe to examine your wound, wiping it clean on his trouser leg before he begins. The concept of antiseptic practice, using carbolic acid or other chemicals to kill germs, is a brand new theory from Europe, pioneered by Joseph Lister. On the frontier, it's considered eccentric nonsense. The doctor believes, as most do, that infection, or putrefaction, is caused by exposure to air, not by microscopic organisms on his hands or his tools. He examines the gash and declares it needs stitching. He threads a needle, not a fine surgical needle, but a thick, coarse one, perhaps the same kind he uses to mend a saddle, and pulls the edges of your wound together. There is no anesthetic. You are given a bottle of whiskey to drink and a leather strap to bite down on to stifle your screams. The pain is excruciating, a white-hot agony that makes the original injury feel like a mild annoyance. He works quickly, but not gently, his hands stained with the blood of his last patient. After he is done, he wraps your leg in a cloth bandage of questionable cleanliness. He might apply a poultice made of bread and milk, or perhaps some other folk remedy like chewed tobacco or a spider's web, which was believed to have clotting properties. His advice for your recovery is simple. Rest and drink plenty of whiskey for the pain. He charges you a fee that feels exorbitant for a few minutes of agonizing work. The real danger, however, is just beginning. In the days that follow, your leg begins to throb with a deep, persistent ache. The skin around the wound becomes red, swollen, and hot to the touch. This is the start of an infection. The bacteria introduced into your wound by the axe, the dirt, and the doctor's own tools are now multiplying unchecked. The infection might develop into gangrene, where the tissue begins to die, turning black and emitting a foul odor. Now you face the most terrifying procedure in frontier medicine: amputation. If the infection spreads, the doctor will tell you the only way to save your life is to remove the limb. This procedure is a waking nightmare. You are held down by several strong men while the doctor takes out his amputation saw. Again, there is no effective anesthesia. The speed of the surgeon is the patient's only mercy. A skilled frontier doctor could remove a limb in a matter of minutes. You would hear the sickening sound of the saw grinding through your bone, a sound that will haunt you forever, assuming you survive. The shock and blood loss from the procedure itself are often fatal. The survival rate for a major amputation is dismally low, not because of the surgery itself, but because of the subsequent infection in the open stomach. One of the curious and grim little facts of frontier medicine is the prevalence of patent medicines. These were prepackaged bottles of tonics and elixirs sold at the general store, promising to cure everything from consumption tuberculosis to female complaints to baldness. Their labels were covered in extravagant claims, but their contents were often useless at best and dangerous at worst. Most of them were a mixture of alcohol, opium, morphine, or even cocaine, mixed with various herbs and coloring. They didn't cure anything, but they certainly made you feel better for a little while, and they were highly addictive. People would spend their last dollar on a bottle of Dr. Kilmer's Swamp Root or Lydia Pink MS vegetable compound, desperate for any relief. Historians are still piecing together the true mortality rates from what we would now consider minor injuries. How many people died from an infected blister, a splinter, or a toothache that obsessed? The data is sparse, but diaries and letters are filled with tragic stories of loved ones lost to what started as a trivial complaint. The line between life and death was incredibly thin, and it was often erased not by the injury or the illness, but by the very attempt to treat it. As you lie in your cabin, feverish and in agony, staring at your swollen, discolored leg, you realize that your fate is now in the hands of chance and a very dirty set of tools. Let's step back from the brink of amputation for a moment. Your leg is throbbing, a grim reminder of the visit to the doctor. But you manage to avoid the saw. At least for now. Your body, through some miracle of resilience, begins to fight off the worst of the infection. But this experience has taught you a profound and terrifying lesson of the West. Even the smallest breach in your body's defenses can be a death sentence. The world is full of mundane objects waiting to betray you. You learn to move with a new kind of caution. A simple splinter, acquired while grabbing firewood, is no longer a minor annoyance to be plucked out and forgotten. It's a potential source of tetanus, or lacquehead, a horrifying disease caused by bacteria found in soil and rust. The infection causes agonizing muscle spasms, powerful enough to break bones, and a characteristic locking of the jaw that makes it impossible to eat or drink. It is almost always fatal. Now, every time you handle rough wood, you are acutely aware of the danger. A blister on your heel from a worn-out boot is another source of constant anxiety. You walk everywhere, and a blister is inevitable. But if that blister breaks, it creates an open wound on your foot, which is constantly being exposed to the filth and mud of the streets. A simple blister can become an ulcerated sore that refuses to heal, leading to a systemic infection, or sepsis, what people at the time would have called blood poisoning. You see men limping through town, their careers as laborers or miners cut short, not by a dramatic accident, but by something as simple as poorly fitting shoes. Kitchen accidents are a daily threat. A small cut from a knife while slicing salt pork, or a burn from a sputtering grease fire on your cast iron stove can escalate quickly. There are no antibiotic ointments, no sterile bandages. You might trap a burn in a greasy rag, which only serves to trap bacteria against the damaged skin. You learn to fear the kitchen almost as much as you fear the doctor's office. Even the natural world, which can seem so beautiful from a distance, is filled with small-scale threats. An insect bite, something you would barely notice in your modern life, can become a major medical event. A mosquito bite could transmit malaria in certain regions. A spider bite, particularly from a black widow or brown recluse, could lead to a necrotic lesion, a patch of dying flesh that grows larger by the day. And then there are the less exotic but more persistent pests, like ticks, which are a constant presence in the tall grasses and wooded areas. while the full extent of tick-borne illnesses like Lyme disease wasn't understood. People certainly knew that tick bites could lead to fevers and strange, lingering sicknesses. One of the more peculiar medical beliefs of the time was the theory of laudable pus. This is a concept that is completely alien to modern medicine. Today, we know that pus is a sign of infection, an accumulation of dead white blood cells and bacteria. But in the 19th century, many doctors believed that the formation of thick, creamy, white pus in a wound was a good thing, a laudable or praiseworthy sign that the body was successfully expelling the bad humors or toxins causing the illness. Clear, watery discharge, on the other hand, was seen as a bad omen. So a doctor might actually be pleased to see your wound oozing with what we now know is a raging bacterial infection. This misguided belief meant that they often did nothing to clean a wound, waiting for this healthy pus to appear. The history of oral hygiene in the West is another area ripe with small, escalating horrors. Most people do not brush their teeth. If they do, they might use a frayed twig or a rag dipped in salt or soot. Sugar, when available, is consumed in unrefined forms, and the coarse, gritty diet can wear down enamel. A simple cavity is a slow-motion disaster. It grows until it hits the nerve, causing a toothache of legendary proportions. There are no root canals. The only solution is extraction. The dentist is often the same man as the doctor and the barber. Or it might be the blacksmith, who has the strongest pair of pliers. The procedure is exactly as brutal as it sounds. No anesthetic. Just a strong grip and a quick, violent yank. A broken jaw is not an uncommon complication. If the tooth abscesses, the infection can spread into the jawbone and from there, into the bloodstream, leading to death. The academic debate on this topic often centers on the idea of pathocoenesis, a term for the characteristic disease landscape of a particular time and place. The pathocoenesis of the American West was defined not by one single plague, but by a constant, grinding assault of opportunistic infections. The population was weakened by poor nutrition, physical exhaustion, and psychological stress, making them more vulnerable to the legion of microbes in their environment. People lived in a state of constant, low-grade inflammation, their bodies always fighting something. You survive your axe wound, but you are not the same. You are now intimately familiar with your own fragility. You learn to read your body's signals with a new intensity. Is that headache just a headache? Or the start of typhoid? Is that stomach cramp just indigestion? Or the onset of cholera? You live with a low hum of medical anxiety that never quite goes away. The West doesn't just harden your hands and your muscles. It hardens your nerves, forcing you to accept a level of risk and uncertainty that would be unthinkable in the world you came from. Every sunrise is a gift, and every small, unbroken patch of skin is a victory. Your leg is healing, albeit slowly, and you feel a desperate need for a change of scenery, a bit of social contact, a drink. Your mind naturally turns to the most iconic building in any frontier town, the saloon. In the movies, it's a place of high drama, tense poker games, heroic brawls, and fateful meetings. But as you push open the swinging doors, the reality that greets you is less about heroism and more about desperation, noise, and the potent smell of cheap whiskey. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's a complexioned, unpleasant blend. Stale beer, unwashed bodies, cheap cigar smoke, and the faint but persistent odor of vomit from the previous night's excesses. The floor is covered in a thick layer of sawdust, which is not there for rustic charm. Its purpose is to absorb spilled drinks, tobacco spit, and whatever else might end up on the floor, making it easier to sweep out in the morning. You see men using brass spittoons or gabuines with varying degrees of accuracy. The room is dark and crowded. Even in the middle of the day, there are no large, sunlit windows. The light comes from a few smoky kerosene lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The clientele is almost exclusively male. You see miners still covered in dust, weary cattle drivers at the end of a long trail, farmers escaping the isolation of their homesteads, and a collection of drifters and laborers with nowhere else to go. This is not a place for polite conversation. The noise level is high, a low roar of slurred speech, loud arguments, and the occasional burst of forced, ragged laughter. In the corner, a man is listlessly playing an out-of-tune piano, the music barely audible over the din. You make your way to the bar, a long plank of polished wood that is often the grandest piece of furniture in the entire town. Behind it stands the bartender, who is more than just a server. He is the unofficial bouncer, banker, and therapist for the establishment. He polishes glasses with a rag of dubious cleanliness and listens with a stoic expression to the ramblings of his patrons. You order a whiskey. He slides a small, thick-bottomed glass in front of you and pours from an unlabeled bottle. The whiskey is raw, fiery, and tastes like paint-thinner. This is not aged, sophisticated bourbon. It's rot gut, a cheap, high-proof spirit, often distilled right there on the frontier with little to no quality control. It might be colored with burnt sugar or even tobacco juice to give it the appearance of aged whiskey. A common and dangerous practice was to stretch the supply by adding things like turpentine, ammonia, or even strychnine for an extra kick. The quality of the alcohol was notoriously poor, and its effects were potent and unpredictable. It's no wonder that a few glasses of this concoction could quickly lead to explosive aggression. And that brings you to the violence. The classic Hollywood shootout. The high noon duel between two stoic gunslingers is almost entirely a myth. It was an exceptionally rare event. The much more common form of violence in a saloon was a messy, drunken, and decidedly unheroic brawl. An argument over a card game, a perceived insult, or nothing at all could erupt into a chaotic flailing of fists. Men would grab whatever was at hand, a heavy beer mug, a chair, a bottle, and the fight would be a clumsy, brutal affair, ending when one man was too injured or too exhausted to continue. Knives are more common weapons than guns in these altercations. A pistol was expensive to own and operate, while almost every man carried a knife for daily tasks. One of the more peculiar features you might see in a more upscale saloon is the free lunch. This was a marketing gimmick to lure in customers. The bar would lay out a spread of food, typically salty items like crackers, cheese, pretzels, and heavily salted meats. The food was free, but it was designed to make you thirsty, ensuring that you would buy more of the bartender's overpriced, low-quality drinks. It was a clever and effective business model. Historians who study social life on the frontier often debate the true function of the saloon. Was it merely a den of vice and violence, as reformers of the era claim, or did it serve a vital social purpose? For many men, living in a world of intense physical labor and profound isolation, the saloon was the only place for social contact. It was a place to hear news, find temporary work, and simply be in the company of other human beings. Even if that company was rough and unpredictable, it was a pressure valve for a society under immense strain. As you stand at the bar, nursing your fiery drink, you observe the scene. You see the false bravado, the lonely stares, the desperate search for a moment of escape. You don't see any heroes. You see men who are tired, dirty, and often deeply lonely, trying to wash away the hardships of their lives with a few glasses of poison. The saloon isn't a stage for legends to be born. It's a waiting room for shattered dreams. A noisy, smoky monument to the quiet desperation that permeates this town. You finish your drink, the raw spirit burning a trail down your throat, and decide you've had enough social contact for one day. The morning after your visit to the saloon, your head is pounding and your pockets are lighter. The harsh reality sets in. You need to earn a living. The dream that brought you west. The promise of a homestead. A gold claim. A profitable business. Is a distant ambition. The immediate need is for cash. For food. For the means to simply keep going. This means finding a job. And in the West, work is not about career fulfillment. It's about hard, relentless, physical labor that grinds you down day by day. Your options are limited by your skills and the local economy. If you are in a mining town, the most obvious job is in the mines. But this isn't the romantic image of a lone prospector panning for gold in a sun-dappled street. That kind of surface-level mining, or placer mining, was a short-lived phase of any gold rush. The real money, and most common form of employment, is in industrial hard rock mining. This means working for a large company that owns the rights to a deep vein of ore. Your workday begins before sunrise. You join a line of other men, their faces grim and shadowed in the early morning light, and descend into the earth in a rickety, open-air cage. The mine shaft is dark, damp, and cold. The air is thick with the dust from blasting and drilling, and it smells of damp earth, sweat, and explosives. You spend 10, maybe 12 hours a day in near total darkness. Your only light coming from a candle stub stuck to the front of your hat or a small, smoky oil lamp. Your job is brutal and repetitive. You might be a mucker, shoveling endless tons of rock and ore into carts. Or you might be a driller, holding a heavy steel drill bit against the rock face while your partner strikes it with a sledgehammer. The concussive shock traveling up your arms with every blow. The noise is deafening. The clang of hammers, the rumble of our carts, the shouts of the foreman. And then there's the blasting. You use unstable nitroglycerin or dynamite to break up the rock. And accidents are frequent and horrific. Cavains are a constant threat. The timbers that shore up the tunnels groan under the immense pressure of the earth above. Every creak, every trickle of dust from the ceiling, sends a jolt of fear through you. A lung disease called silicosis, caused by inhaling the fine rock dust, is a slow, creeping death sentence for many miners. Though at the time it's just called miner's consumption. Perhaps mining isn't for you. If you are in a cattle town, you might try to find work as a cowboy. Again, forget the Hollywood image of the free roaming hero. The real work of a cowboy is long, monotonous, and anything but glamorous. During the great cattle drives, you spend months on the trail, working from before sunrise to after sunset, for pay that amounts to about $1 a day. Your job is to keep a massive, stupid, and easily spooked herd of longhorn cattle moving in the right direction. You ride in a perpetual cloud of dust, your skin chapped by the sun and wind. Stampedes are a real and terrifying danger. A thundering wave of hooves and horns that can appear with no warning, often in the dead of night during a thunderstorm. Your diet is the same monotonous fare every day. Beans, bacon, and coffee. The work is isolating and exhausting. If you are in a farming region, you can try to work as a farmhand. This is the back-breaking labor of sod busting, breaking the tough, virgin prairie sod with a heavy plow pulled by oxen or mules. You work behind the plow all day, every muscle straining, under a sun that offers no shade. During harvest season, the work is even more intense. A frantic race to get the crops in before the first frost or a devastating hailstorm. The pay is meager, and the work is seasonal. In the winter, you will be out of a job. One of the more peculiar and dangerous jobs on the frontier was that of a buffalo hunter. In the years after the Civil War, the demand for buffalo hides exploded. A hunter could make a small fortune in a short time, but the work was a bloody, grim business. You would use a powerful, long-range rifle, like a Shorts, to kill as many buffalo as possible from a single herd, sometimes hundreds in a day. Then came the filthy work of skinning. You would spend hours covered in blood and gore, peeling the heavy hides from the carcasses. The smell was overwhelming, and the landscape you left behind was a grotesque boneyard. It was a boom and bust industry, and it led to the near extinction of the American bison, a fact that had devastating consequences for the Plains Indians who depended on them for survival. The academic debate about labor in the West often focuses on the conflict between the myth of rugged individualism and the reality of wage labor. The dream was to be your own boss, to own your own land or mine. The reality for most was working for someone else, for low wages, in dangerous conditions, with no job security or legal protection. The West was, in many ways, an early and brutal version of industrial capitalism, set against a backdrop of vast, open spaces. Whatever job you choose, you come home at the end of the day physically shattered. Your hands are raw, your back is a knot of pain, and your ears are still ringing from the noise of the mine or the lowing of the herd. You eat your meager meal and fall into an exhausted sleep, only to wake up and do it all again the next day. There is no career ladder to climb. There is only the work, the endless, grinding work that slowly wears your body down. The promise of the West feels very far away. All you know for sure is the ache in your muscles and the weight of another day's labor. One evening, as you are nursing your sore muscles, you hear a commotion down the street. A man, drunk and belligerent, has been thrown out of the saloon and is now smashing the window of the general store. A figure emerges from the shadows, a man with a dusty hat and a star pinned to his vest. The town marshal. This is the moment, you think, for justice to be served. But the justice you are about to witness is not the clean, procedural affair you are used to. It's swift, arbitrary, and brutally personal. The marshal doesn't read the man his rights. He doesn't try to de-escalate the situation with calm words. He walks directly up to the man and, with a single, practice motion, brings the long barrel of his pistol down hard on the man's head. This move is called buffaloing, and it's a common and effective, if brutal, way to subdue a suspect without resorting to gunfire. The man crumples to the ground, unconscious. The marshal then grabs him by the collar and drags him, limp and bleeding, to the town's jail, which is likely just a small, windowless shack or even a reinforced storage room at the back of his own office. This is your introduction to frontier law enforcement. The men who wore the star were not always the noble, selfless heroes of legend. They were often chosen for one reason. They were often more willing to use violence than the criminals they were supposed to control. A town marshal or sheriff was frequently a man with a checkered past himself, a former bounty hunter, a veteran of the war, or even a one-time outlaw who decided that a steady paycheck on the side of the law was a safer bet. His authority didn't come from a law book. It came from the fear and respect he could command with his fists and his gun. The legal system itself is a bare-bones affair. In a newly formed town, there might be no formal court at all. The judge could be the local justice of the peace, a man who might also be the postmaster or the land agent, with no legal training whatsoever. His courtroom could be the front room of the saloon or a table at the general store. Trials are swift. There are no lengthy investigations, no DNA evidence, no defense attorneys arguing procedural points. A decision is often made within hours, based on the testimony of a few witnesses and the judge's own gut feeling. The burden of proof is flimsy, and personal reputation plays a huge role. If the accused is a known drifter and the accuser is a respected merchant, the outcome is all but certain. The punishments are direct and often physical. For minor offenses like public drunkenness or brawling, the sentence might be a fine or a night in the squalid jail. But for more serious crimes like theft, the punishment could be a public whipping or being branded. A horse thief, considered one of the worst criminals on the frontier because a man's life and livelihood depended on his horse, might be summarily hanged by a vigilance committee without any trial at all. This brings you to the strange and controversial role of vigilante justice. In areas where formal law was weak or seen as corrupt, prominent citizens, merchants, ranchers, and other powerful men would sometimes form these committees to clean up the town. They would round up suspected rustlers, robbers, and troublemakers and hold their own trials, which were often little more than organized lynchings, while they saw themselves as champions of order. Their methods were those of a mob. The line between justice and vengeance was blurry, if it existed at all. A little-known aspect of frontier law is how civil disputes were handled. Imagine your neighbor's cattle have trampled your small vegetable garden, ruining your food supply for the winter. You can't just sue him in small claims court. You might take the issue to the justice of the peace, but his ruling is not easily enforceable. More often than not, disputes like this are settled personally, with a heated argument, a fist fight, or, in the worst cases, a feud that could simmer for years, passed down through families. The law is what you can personally enforce. Historians who study the legal history of the West are still debating the effectiveness and fairness of this system. Was it a necessary, pragmatic response to a lawless environment, as some argue, or was it a system that overwhelmingly favored the powerful and connected, dispensing a brutal form of class-based justice? The romantic notion of the lone woman standing up for the little guy is complicated by the fact that these lawmen were paid by the town's business elite and were often tasked with protecting their property and interests above all else. A lawman might crack down hard on a broken, desperate man who stole a loaf of bread, while turning a blind eye to the swindling practices of a powerful land speculator. As you watch the marshal lock the unconscious man away, you realize that law and order in the West is not about abstract principles of justice. It is about power. It is about who has the strength and the will to impose their version of order on everyone else. The law is not your friend or your protector. It is a force as unpredictable and dangerous as a flash flood or a prairie fire. You learn to keep your head down, to avoid trouble, and to never, ever expect a fair fight. In or out of a courtroom, you've seen the world of men, the mines, the saloons, the dusty streets, but you start to notice the other half of the population, the figures who are oft unrelegated to the background in the grand, masculine myth of the West. The women. Their lives are a world away from the romanticized portrayals of the saloon girl with a heart of gold or the helpless rancher's daughter waiting for a hero. The reality for women on the frontier is a life of relentless work, profound isolation, and a unique set of dangers and limitations. You see them at the edges of town, in the doorways of cabins, or hurrying through the streets with a singular focus. Their hands are not soft and delicate. They are chapped, calloused, and strong from a daily routine that would exhaust the average man. A woman's workday begins before sunrise and ends long after sunset. She is responsible for everything that happens inside the home, which, as you've learned, is a constant battle against filth and entropy. She hoes the water. She cooks the monotonous meals over a hot and dangerous stove. She mends the clothes. She tends to the children. She washes the laundry. A grueling, all-day task involving boiling water, harsh lye soap, and brutal scrubbing by hand. If her family has a homestead, her work extends far beyond the four walls of the cabin. She is also the gardener, tending the small vegetable patch that is the only source of fresh food and fighting a constant war against insects and drought. She raises the chickens, milks the cow if they are lucky enough to have one, and churns the butter. She is an active partner in the economic survival of the family. Her labor just as critical as the man's, though it is unpaid and largely invisible. The isolation for women is profound. While a man might go into town for supplies, or work alongside other men in a mine or on a cattle drive, a woman on a homestead can go weeks or even months without seeing another woman. Her only company is her immediate family. The rest, empty landscape that might seem beautiful or full of promise to a man, can feel like a prison to a woman transplanted from a more communal life back east. Diaries and letters from frontier women are filled with expressions of deep loneliness and a longing for the companionship of mothers, sisters, and friends. This crushing isolation is a leading cause of the prairie madness you heard about, a deep depression that could be just as fatal as any physical disease. For women in the towns, life is different but no less difficult. They might work as seamstresses, take in laundry, or run boarding houses, which is essentially monetizing the same domestic labor they would be doing at home, but on a larger and more demanding scale. A handful of women manage to enter professions, becoming school teachers, one of the few respectable jobs available, or, in very rare cases, running their own shops or newspapers. And then there are the other women, the ones who are both highly visible and completely ostracized, the saloon girls and prostitutes. These women are often romanticized, but their reality is bleak. Many are widows, abandoned wives, or young women with no family and no other means of survival. They are not living a life of glamorous rebellion. They are trapped in a dangerous and exploitative trade. They are at constant risk of violence from their clients and their pimps, and they are highly susceptible to venereal diseases for which there is no cure. A little-known fact is the high rate of suicide and opium addiction among these women, a grim testament to the desperation of their circumstances. The good women of the town are forbidden from speaking to them, creating a rigid social hierarchy that leaves them utterly alone. The legal status of women is another harsh reality. A married woman has few legal rights. She is, under the principle of C. overture, legally covered by her husband. She cannot own property in her own name, sign contracts, or even control her own wages. Everything she has, and everything she earns, legally belongs to her husband. This makes her completely dependent on him, and it leaves her with no recourse if the marriage is abusive or if he abandons her. Yet, amidst these limitations, there is a fascinating paradox that historians continue to explore. In some ways, the West also offers women opportunities they wouldn't have had in the more rigid society of the East. The scarcity of women on the frontier gives them a certain social leverage, and the necessities of survival often force a blurring of traditional gender roles. A woman on a homestead might learn to handle a rifle and hunt, or help defend her home, out of sheer necessity. Some of the Western territories, desperate to attract female settlers and create stable communities, were also the first places in the United States to grant women the right to vote, Wyoming being the first, in 1867. This was less about a belief in gender equality and more about a pragmatic political calculation. But it was a significant step forward, nonetheless. You see a woman haggling fiercely with the general store owner over the price of flour. You see another calmly loading a wagon, her movements efficient and strong. You see the quiet resilience in their eyes, a toughness forged in a crucible of hardship. They are not waiting to be rescued. They are the silent, uncredited architects of whatever stability and civilization exists in this chaotic place. They are building homes, raising families, and holding society together, one grueling day at a time. The heat of the long summer finally breaks, but the relief is short-lived. A new and more insidious enemy begins to creep in, the cold. As autumn deepens, you feel a growing sense of anxiety in the town. People are working with a frantic urgency, thatching the chimking in their cabins, stockpiling firewood, and buying up the last sacks of flour and salted meat from the general store. They know what is coming. Winter in the West is not a picturesque season of gentle snowfalls. It is a long, isolating, and oft unlethal siege. The first blizzard arrives without warning. One day, the sky is a clear, cold blue. The next, it's a churning wall of white. The wind howls like a living thing, a relentless, deafening roar that seems to penetrate the very walls of your cabin. The temperature plummets to levels you've never experienced. A cold so profound it feels like it can freeze the breath in your lungs. You huddle inside your small, drafty shelter, stuffing every last crack with rags to block the fine, stinging snow that finds its way through. Your world shrinks to the size of a single room. 4 days, sometimes weeks at a time, you are a prisoner in your own home. The windows, if you have them, are plastered over with a thick layer of ice, blocking out what little light there is. The only illumination comes from the flickering flames of your fireplace or stove, which you must feed constantly. Your pile of firewood, which seemed so large in the autumn, now looks terrifyingly small. You begin to ration it, sitting in the semi-darkness and the biting cold for hours to make the supply last. Running out of firewood is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence. You would freeze to death in your own home within a day. The monotony is a form of psychological torture. You have nothing to do but listen to the wind, stare at the same four walls, and try to stay warm. The days bleed into one another, a blur of great twilight and long, dark nights. The silence inside the cabin is broken only by the howl of the wind and the nervous coughs of your family members. Cabin fever is a very real phenomenon. The force, prolonged proximity can lead to frayed nerves, arguments, and a sense of suffocating claustrophobia. Food becomes an obsession. You carefully ration your supplies of flour, beans, and salt pork. Every meal is a reminder that your stockpile is finite. If the winter is longer than you anticipated, you will face starvation. The stories of the Donner Party, who became trapped by snow in the Sierra Nevada and resorted to cannibalism to survive, are a chilling and ever-present cautionary tale. While that was an extreme case, a starving winter is a common experience for many homesteaders. You might be forced to eat your own livestock, the oxen you need for plowing, the milk cow that is your only source of dairy. These are heartbreaking decisions, a choice between immediate survival and future prosperity. A little-known challenge of a frontier winter is the problem of snow blindness. After a blizzard, when the sun finally emerges, the light reflecting off the vast, unbroken expanse of snow is blindingly intense. Going outside without some form of eye protection, even just a piece of cloth with small slits cut in it, can cause a painful, temporary blindness that feels like having sand poured into your eyes. It is another way the environment seems actively hostile. The isolation is absolute. The trails are impassable, buried under drifts of snow that can be 10 or 20 feet deep. The nearest neighbor might as well be on the moon. If you have a medical emergency, a burst appendix, a complicated childbirth, a serious injury, there is no hope of getting a doctor. You are entirely on your own. Many frontier diaries from the winter months are filled with harrowing accounts of people trying to treat complex medical problems with nothing but folk remedies and prayer. The question of how communities survived these winters is a subject of ongoing historical research. While individual homesteads were deeply isolated, towns offered a slightly better chance of survival through communal support. People might pool their resources, and those with a surplus of food or firewood might help those who were running low. However, this charity had its limits. In a long, hard winter, the instinct for self-preservation often overrode any sense of community. Hoarding was common, and the social fabric of the town could be stretched to its breaking point. When a break in the weather finally comes, the town slowly and cautiously comes back to life. People emerge from their homes, blinking in the bright light, their faces pale and thin. The first conversations are about who made it through. Inevitably, there are stories of loss. A family found frozen in their cabin, a load rapper who never returned from his line, an elderly couple who succumbed to illness. The winter calls the weak, the unlucky, and the unprepared. As you stand in the cold, crisp air, looking at the seemingly endless white landscape, you understand the West in a new way. It is not just a place of opportunity. It is a place of extremes. The same land that can be so beautiful and bountiful in the summer can become a white desert of death in the winter. Surviving the winter is not a victory that brings celebration. It's a temporary reprieve. You know that it will come again next year, and the year after that. It is the great, recurring test of your endurance. As the snows of the brutal winter begin to melt, you start to venture further from the town, exploring the landscape. One day, you see them, a small group of people on horseback, their features and clothing starkly different from anyone in your settlement. They are the original inhabitants of this land, the Native Americans. Your entire understanding of them has been shaped by second-hand stories, rumors, and the sensationalist dime novels back east, which portray them as either savage, bloodthirsty warriors or noble, vanishing figures of a romantic past. The reality you encounter is far more complex and far more human. You are seeing this land through the lens of a settler. To you, it is the frontier, a vast, empty wilderness waiting to be tamed, cultivated, and owned. It is a resource to be exploited. But to the people you are now watching, this is not a wilderness. It is their home. It is a landscape rich with history, sacred sites, and a complex network of resources that they have managed for centuries. The river you see as a convenient water source and sewer is, to them, a lifeblood with a name and a story. The hills where you might search for gold are, to them, the dwelling places of spirits. Your concept of land is based on deeds, fences, and individual ownership. Theirs is based on a communal, ancestral relationship with the territory. The interaction, where it happens, is likely not the dramatic confrontation of movies. It's more likely to be awkward and transcational. They might approach your settlement to trade. They have valuable goods, expertly tanned buffalo robes, turkey, or knowledge of the local terrain. You have things they desire: metal tools, coffee, sugar, and flour. The trade is often fraught with misunderstanding. You are operating in a world of cash and fixed prices. They are operating in a world of barter, gift giving, and reciprocity, where the social relationship is as important as the goods exchanged. You begin to see the devastating impact of your presence. The huge herds of buffalo, which were the cornerstone of the Plains Indians' economy and culture, are disappearing at an alarming rate, hunted nearly to extinction for their hides by men seeking a quick profit. This is not just the loss of a food source. It is a deliberate act of economic and cultural warfare. An army officer famously said, "Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." The tribes are being systematically starved into submission. The land itself is being transformed in ways that are disastrous for them. Your plows break the sacred sod. Your cattle graze on the grasses their horses and the buffalo need to survive. The fences you erect to mark your property cut across their traditional hunting grounds and migration routes. The westward expansion, which you see as a story of progress and manifest destiny, is, from their perspective, an invasion. A little-known aspect of this relationship is the role of disease. You and your fellow settlers are carrying invisible weapons. You have a degree of immunity to diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, which have been endemic in Europe for centuries. But to the Native American populations, these are verge-in-soil epidemics. They have no inherited resistance. A single infected person can unleash a plague that wipes out entire villages. These epidemics swept through the West often far ahead of the main wave of settlement, carried by traders and early explorers, depopulating vast areas and shattering social structures long before the first wagon trains arrived. The demographic collapse they suffered was staggering, one of the greatest in human history. The U.S. government's policy toward the tribes is a confusing and contradictory mix of treaties, forced removals, and open warfare. You hear talk of the reservation system. The idea, as presented to the public, is to provide a protected territory where the tribes can live peacefully and learn to become farmers in the white man's image. The reality is that these reservations are almost always on the poorest, least desirable land, often far from the tribe's ancestral home. The government promises to provide rations and supplies, but these are frequently late, of poor quality, or stolen by corrupt agents. The reservation becomes a place of poverty, dependency, and despair. Historians continue to debate the nature of Native American resistance. It was not a monolithic, unified front. Different tribes and different leaders had vastly different strategies. Some, like Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, tried to lead their people to safety in a desperate fight for freedom. Others, like Red Cloud of the Lakota, waged successful military campaigns to protect their lands, at least for a time. Still others attempted to accommodate and adapt, seeing it as the only path to survival. The narrative of a simple cowboy's versus Indians conflict completely erases this complex political landscape. You watch the small group ride away until they are just specks on the horizon. The encounter leaves you with a disquieting feeling. You came west seeking a better life, a piece of land to call your own. But you are beginning to understand that your dream is being built on the foundation of someone else's nightmare. The empty land you came to claim was not empty at all. It was a home that is being systematically dismantled. This realization doesn't stop you from your daily struggle for survival, but it adds a new, troubling layer to your existence here. The silence of the prairie is no longer empty. It is filled with the ghosts of a world you are helping to destroy. Spring has fully arrived, and with the warmer weather comes a new kind of torment. It is not a dramatic threat like a blizzard or a band of outlaws. It is a tiny, insidious, and ever-present misery. Your home, your clothes, and your own body have been invaded by an army of nearly invisible enemies. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs. In an era before modern pesticides and obsessive hygiene, you are locked in a constant, losing battle against these relentless pests. You first notice it as a persistent itch. You dismiss it at first, but it gets worse. You find small, red welts on your skin, often in lines or clusters. This is the telltale sign of bedbugs. These tiny, reddish-brown insects are masters of stealth. During the day, they hide in the cracks of your wooden bed frame, in the seams of your mattress, or even in the mud-chinked walls of your cabin. At night, drawn by the warmth of your body and the carbon dioxide you exhale, they emerge to feed on your blood. Your bed, which should be a place of rest and refuge, becomes a nightly torture chamber. You lie in the dark, feeling the phantom crawling sensations, tensing at every tiny itch. Sleep is fitful and constantly interrupted. In the morning, you wake up to new bites and tiny bloodstains on your sheets from the bugs you crushed in your sleep. Eradicating them is nearly impossible. You might try pouring boiling water over your bed frame or scrubbing it with lye soap, but you will likely miss some of the eggs, and the infestation will return in a few weeks. These pests are a shared community experience. You can get them from sitting on a bench at the general store or by brushing up against someone in a crowd. Then there are the lice. There are two main types you have to worry about: head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live in the seams of your clothing. Head lice are a maddening nuisance, causing intense itching on your scalp. You might try to comb them out with a fine-toothed comb, or use folk remedies like dousing your hair in kerosene, a dangerously flammable solution. Body lice, however, are a more serious threat. They live and lay their eggs in your clothes, only moving onto your skin to feed. In an age where people own very few sets of clothing, unbathing is infrequent. Body lice thrive, but they are more than just an itchy pest. A little known and deadly fact is that body lice are the primary vector for epidemic typhus, a completely different disease from the typhoid fever you get from water. Typhus is a brutal illness, characterized by a high fever, a severe headache, a dark rash, and delirium. It thrives in crowded, unsanitary conditions, like army camps, jails, and impoverished frontier towns. It has been a major killer throughout human history, and you are living in its ideal breeding ground. Fleas are another constant companion, brought into your home by the dogs, cats, and even the pigs that wander the town. They infest your dirt floor, your bedding, and your clothes. Their bites are intensely itchy, and they are notoriously difficult to get rid of. While you might not immediately associate them with the Black Death, fleas are indeed carriers of bubonic plague. While major plague outbreaks were not a feature of the American West, smaller, localized outbreaks did occur, transmitted by fleas from infected prairie dogs and other rodents. A sudden, mysterious, and fatal fever in a town could very well have been the plague, even if it wasn't recognized as such. The constant itching from these various bites is more than just a physical annoyance. It's a psychological drain. You scratch your bites raw, creating open sores that can then become infected by the bacteria on your skin and under your fingernails. A simple flea bite can lead to a serious skin infection, like impetigo or cellulitis. It's another example of how a small problem can quickly escalate into a life-threatening one. Historians who study the history of hygiene often refer to the great and washed of the past. And there is some truth to this. But it is not because people enjoyed being dirty. The sheer labor involved in staying clean was immense. To do a full load of laundry, a woman had to haul dozens of gallons of water. heated over a fire. Scrub the clothes on a washboard with harsh soap. Rinse them and hang them to dry, a process that could take an entire day. A full-body bath was an equally involved ordeal. For most people, it was a luxury they simply didn't have the time or energy for. The academic debate around this topic sometimes touches on the sensory world of the past. We are so accustomed to a sanitized, deodorized environment that we can scarcely imagine what a 19th century town would have smelled and felt like. The air would have been thick with the smells of wood smoke, manure, and unwashed bodies, and the feeling of being alive would have included the constant, low-level irritation of insect bites. This was simply a part of the daily sensory experience. As you sit on your porch in the evening, scratching at a new collection of bites on your ankles, you feel a sense of weary resignation. You can fight off the cold. You can find food. You can even survive an injury. But this quiet, creeping, crawling invasion feels different. It is a war you can't win. It is a constant reminder of your proximity to the dirt, the filth, and the tiny organisms that thrive within it. It is a humbling and deeply uncomfortable part of your new reality. The grand, heroic quest is, at its most basic level, very, very itchy. One afternoon, a stranger rides into town. He is dressed in black, with 2 Colt pistols strapped to his hips and a Lulls tied-down holster. He moves with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the street. The townsfolk stop and stare. This, you think, is it? This is the real deal. A genuine gunslinger. A man whose life is defined by his skill with a pistol. The air crackles with attention straight out of a dime novel. But the legend of the gunfighter and the reality of his existence are two vastly different things. The first thing to understand is that the term gunfighter itself is largely a creation of later writers on Hollywood. In their own time, these men were known by less glamorous names. Shooters, pistoler, or, more often than not, simply killer. Their profession was not noble. They were often gamblers, outlaws, hired muscle for powerful cattle barons, or lawmen whose methods were indistinguishable from those of the criminals they pursued. The idea of a chivalrous knight-errant of the prairie, defending the innocent with his lightning-fast draw, is pure fiction. The iconic showdown at high noon on a deserted main street. It almost never happened. It makes for great drama. But it's a terrible way to win a fight. Why would you face your enemy head-on, giving him an equal chance, when it's so much safer to shoot him in the back or ambush him in a dark alley? Most famous gunfights, like the legendary shootout at the O.K. Corral, were not formal duels. They were chaotic, close quarters, and very messy affairs, often involving multiple people firing at once. The O.K. Corral fight, for instance, took place in a narrow lot and lasted about 30 seconds, with around 30 shots fired. It was a panic, brutal scrum, not a choreographed ballet of violence. The skill that defined these men was not just a fast draw. In fact, many historians argue that an incredibly fast draw was less important than a steady hand, a calm nerve, and the willingness to shoot first. The famous lawman Wyatt Earp was not known for his speed, but for his cold-blood composure under fire. Bat Masterson, another famous figure, later became a sports writer in New York City and often mocked the sensationalized stories about his past, emphasizing that he had survived by being careful and smart, not by being the fastest. The guns themselves were not the precision instruments you see in movies. The Colt Peacemaker and other revolvers of the era were powerful, but they were also notoriously inaccurate, especially at any kind of distance. Hitting a man-sized target from 50 yards away with a one-handed shot was an incredible feat of marksmanship that very few could consistently achieve. The idea of shooting a coin out of the air or a gun out of someone's hand is pure fantasy. Most gunfights happened at very close range, often across a poker table, where accuracy was less of an issue. A little known but crucial detail is the ammunition. The cartridges of the day used black powder. When you fired a gun, it produced a massive cloud of thick, white, acrid smoke that would completely obscure your vision. In a gunfight, after the first shot, you were often firing blind into a cloud of smoke, aiming at the last place you saw your opponent or at the flash of his own gun. This is another reason why fights were often over so quickly. Visibility dropped to near zero almost instantly. So, who are these men? Really? Why does the myth persist? The academic debate often centers on the role of the popular press of the 19th century. Eastern newspapers and dime novelists like Ned Buntline discovered that stories of Western violence sold incredibly well. They took real figures, like Wild Bill Hickok or Billy the Kid, and exaggerated their exploits beyond all recognition, creating a new American archetype. They transformed grubby, violent, and often psychopathic men into romantic anti-heroes. Wild Bill Hickok, for example, was a lawman and gambler who certainly killed several men. But the stories of him killing hundreds in stand-up duels were complete fabrications, which he himself often encouraged. Billy the Kid was not a charismatic rebel. He was a teenage cattle rustler and killer caught up in a brutal New Mexico and war. As you watch the stranger walk into the saloon, you realize the truth. The gun on his hip is not a symbol of honor or justice. It is a tool of his trade, just like a miner's pick-axe or a farmer's plow. His reputation is his primary asset, and it's a reputation built on fear. He survives not by being a hero, but by being the man that no one wants to challenge. His life is likely to be short, paranoid, and violent, ending not in a blaze of glory, but with a shot from behind, or on a gallows, or from a diseased liver caused by a life of hard drinking. The tension in the street slowly dissipates. The men go back to their business. The gunslinger is not here to save the town or to challenge its toughest resident. He is probably just passing through, looking for a poker game or a quiet drink. His presence is a reminder of the violence that underpins this society. But he is not the hero of this story. He is just another desperate man trying to survive in a world where a quick trigger finger is one of the few skills that pays. The seasons turn again, and a new kind of fear begins to settle over the town. One that is quieter but more profound than the threat of violence or the harshness of winter. It is the fear of scarcity. The initial supplies you brought with you have dwindled. The town's general store, dependent on long and unreliable supply lines, is running low on essentials. The crops from the last harvest are nearly gone. You are now facing the raw, elemental terror of not having enough food. This isn't the temporary hunger you feel before a meal. This is a deep, gnawing anxiety that colors every aspect of your day. You start to see the world in terms of calories. How much energy will it take to chop that wood? And will the meal you eat tonight be enough to replace it? The monotonous diet of beans and salt pork, which once seemed so dreary, now seems like a feast you wish you still had. Your meals become smaller, less frequent. You learn to ignore the hollow feeling in your stomach. You see the effects of malnutrition all around you. People are thinner, their faces gone, their movements slower. Children, who are the most vulnerable, lose their playful energy. A constant, low-level weakness pervades the community. Your body, deprived of the fuel it needs, becomes more susceptible to the diseases that are always lurking. A common cold, which you might have shaken off in a few days when you were well fed, now lingers for weeks, leaving you drained and frail. In this desperate environment, people are forced to eat things that would have been unthinkable before. You might learn to forage for edible roots and wild greens, but this requires a knowledge of the local flora that you, as a newcomer, likely don't possess. A mistaken identification could lead to poisoning. You might hunt for squirrels, prairie dogs, or any other small creature you can catch. No potential source of protein is overlooked. A particularly grim and little-known food source during times of starvation on the plains was the wolf. Wolves were generally despised as predators that threatened livestock, and they were hunted relentlessly. But in the depths of a starving time, settlers would overcome their revulsion and eat the stringy, gummy meat of the wolves they managed to kill. It was a sign of absolute desperation. Another grim reality was stock grinding, where people would take the hides of their dead livestock, boil them for hours and hours to break down the tough collagen, and create a gelatinous, foul-tasting broth that provided a bare minimum of calories. This scarcity changes the social dynamics of the town. The cautious reserve you noticed when you first arrived hardens into outright suspicion. Everyone knows who might have a hidden stash of food. A wisp of smoke from a neighbor's chimney at an odd time can spark rumors and resentment. Thefts of food, which were once rare, become more common. A stolen chicken or a pilfered bag of flour is not a minor crime. It's a threat to a family's survival, and it can be met with violent retribution. The community spirit that might have pulled people together during a blizzard evaporates in the face of long-term hunger. The bonds of trust fray and break. People become secretive and withdrawn, hoarding what little they have. The idea of neighborliness is a luxury that hunger cannot afford. You begin to look at your fellow townspeople not as companions in a shared struggle, but as competitors for a finite and dwindling pool of resources. Historians who study famine and scarcity often debate the point at which a society's moral compass breaks down. How long does it take for the rules of civilized behavior to dissolve in the face of starvation? The West provides many grim case studies. The most famous, of course, is the Donner Party, where starvation famously led to cannibalism. But there were many other, less documented instances of people resorting to the last resort. Rumors would circulate in starving communities about individuals who had disappeared, or about strangely well-fed families who kept to themselves. The truth of these stories is often impossible to verify, lost to history and shame, but the fear they generated was very real. You find yourself doing things you never thought you would. You might butcher the family dog, a creature you once considered a companion. You might trade a precious heirloom, a watch from your father or a piece of your mother's jewelry, for a half-rotten bag of potatoes. Your sense of self, your own moral boundaries, begin to erode under the relentless pressure of an empty stomach. When a supply wagon finally does arrive, the scene is one of mere riot. People descend on the general store. Their face is a mixture of desperation and hope, clamoring to buy what they can. The prices are exorbitant, but no one cares. The arrival of food is like the breaking of a long drought, but the experience has left a permanent scar on you and on the town. You now understand that civilization is a thin veneer, and that just beneath the surface of your small community lies a primal fear that can turn neighbors into enemies and decent people into desperate survivalists. You will never again take a full pantry for granted. The supply wagon has come. The worst of the hunger is past, and a fragile sense of normalcy is returning to the town, with full bellies and a brief respite from the constant struggle for survival. The human need for diversion and entertainment reasserts itself. But don't picture refined concerts or sophisticated theatrical performances. Recreation on the frontier is as rough, simple, and often as dangerous as every other aspect of life. For most men, the primary source of entertainment remains the saloon. But beyond the drinking and gambling, other pastimes emerge. One of the most common is the simple act of showing off one's physical prowess. Impromptu wrestling matches are a frequent sight on the main street. Two men, often fueled by whiskey and a sense of pride, will strip to the waist and grapple in the dirt, surrounded by a loud and boisterous crowd of their peers placing small bets. These are not matches with formal rules. They are brutal contests of strength and endurance, often ending with one man unconscious or too battered to continue. Marksmanship is another popular and competitive pastime. Men will gather on the edge of town to hold shooting contests. They set up targets, a tin can, a barrel, or just a knot on a fence post, and take turns showing off their skill with a rifle or a pistol. This is not just for fun. It's a practical display of a crucial survival skill. Being known as a good shot earns you a certain level of respect and prestige in the community. The betting is lively, and a man might wager a day's pay on his ability to hit a target that his rival missed. For a more organized form of entertainment, the town might host a horse race. Horses are central to Western life, and the man's pride is often tied up in the speed and quality of his mount. A race is a major social event. People come from miles around, from isolated homesteads in neighboring towns. The track is usually just a long, straight stretch of prairie on the edge of town. The races are wild, chaotic affairs with few rules, and the jockeys are just the horses' owners. The excitement is palpable, a rare chance for the entire community to come together in a shared spectacle of speed and risk. A particularly strange and now unsettling form of entertainment was the turkey shoot. This doesn't mean shooting at a paper target shaped like a turkey. It often meant a live turkey was either buried in the ground with only its head and neck exposed, or tied to a stake. Men would then pay for a chance to shoot at the bird's head from a set distance with a rifle. It was a test of pure accuracy, and the winner got to take the turkey home for dinner. It reflects a mindset where animals were seen purely as resources or objects for sport, a stark contrast to modern sensibilities. What about entertainment that isn't based on violence or competition? Music and dancing are a vital part of frontier social life, but they have a distinctly rustic flair. A dance is often held in a barn or the largest room in someone's house. The furniture is pushed back, the floor is swept, and a band, which might consist of a single fiddler, perhaps accompanied by someone on a banjo or a harmonica, strikes up a tune. The music is lively and repetitive. The dancing is energetic and not at all formal. Men, due to the scarcity of female partners, frequently dance with each other, one tying a handkerchief around his arm to signify that he is taking the female role. These dances are loud, sweaty, and joyous affairs that can last all night, a rare outlet for pure, unadulterated fun. Historians who study leisure in the 19th century often debate the function of these activities. Were they simply a way to blow off steam, or did they serve a deeper social purpose? Many argue that these gatherings were crucial for building community identity and reinforcing social bonds in a transient and unstable society. A horse race or a dance was one of the few occasions where isolated homesteaders, miners, and town dwellers could interact, share news, and arrange marriages. They were the glue that held the fragile community together. For a quieter, more domestic form of entertainment, people would gather for reading circles if they were literate, or simply to tell stories. In a world without electronic media, a good storyteller was a highly valued member of the community. They would spin long, elaborate old tales full of comic exaggerations, or share ghost stories that would make the listeners huddle closer to the fire. As you stand on the edge of the crowd watching two men wrestle in the dust, you see the raw, unvarnished nature of frontier life reflected in its pastimes. The entertainment is loud, physical, and sometimes cruel. It lacks subtlety and refinement, but it is also deeply human. It is a testament to the resilient spirit of people who, despite living in a world of constant hardship, still find the time and the energy to play, to compete, to laugh, and to come together in a shared search for a few moments of joy. The routine of town life, the hard work, the simple food, the rough entertainment, begins to feel like a trap. The original dream that drove you west, the dream of striking it rich, resurfaces with a vengeance. One day, a prospector stumbles into town, his eyes wild with excitement. He pulls out a leather pouch and pours a small pile of gleaming yellow dust onto the bar. Gold? The word spreads through the town like a fever. Within days, the place is half empty. You, along with dozens of others, have caught the gold fever and are heading for the hills, convinced that your fortune lies just beneath the dirt. You sell what few possessions you have to buy: a pick, a shovel, and a pan. You join a stream of other hopefuls, a chaotic procession of men who have abandoned their jobs, their farms, and their families to chase a rumor. The atmosphere is one of frantic, manic optimism. Every man is convinced that he will be the one to find the mother lode. But this journey is not an adventure. It's a desperate gamble, and the odds are overwhelmingly against you. You arrive at the newly established mining camp. It is not a town. It is a chaotic, temporary slum that has sprung up overnight. It consists of a few ragged tents, crude lean TOS made of branches and canvas, and maybe a single wooden shack that serves as a saloon and a general store, selling tools and food at outrageously inflated prices. The camp is squalid, noisy, and lawless. The ground is already scarred with hundreds of holes and pits dug by the men who arrived before you. Your work begins. You are a placer miner, searching for gold that has eroded from its original vein and been washed down into the streams and gravel beds. The most basic method is panning. You shovel some dirt and gravel from the stream it into your shallow metal pan. You add water and begin to swirl it in a careful, practiced motion. The lighter sand and gravel are washed over the edge, while the heavier gold, if there is any, sinks to the bottom. It is backbreaking, soul-crushing work. You spend 12 to 14 hours a day standing in ice-cold mountain water. Your back bent, your hands raw and numb. You pan, and swirl, and stare intently at the bottom of the pan, your heart leaping at every tiny glint of yellow, only to be disappointed when it turns out to be fool's gold, iron pyrite, or just a shiny piece of mica. Day after day, you find nothing but a few tiny specks of color, barely enough to be called dust. The sheer monotony is maddening. You might graduate from a pan to a rocker or a sluice box. These are wooden contraptions that allow you to process more gravel more quickly. The rocker, or cradle, is a box on rockers that you fill with dirt and rock back and forth with water, while the gold gets strapped behind a series of wooden bars called riffles. A sluice box is a long, sloping trough with riffles on the bottom. You divert a stream of water through it and shovel gravel in at the top. It's a more efficient method, but it's still grueling. Heavy labor. A little-known reality of the gold rush is the concept of claim jumping. You stake a claim by driving wooden posts into the ground to mark your small patch of land. But the boundaries are often unclear, and the laws are non-existent. If a rumor starts that you have struck it rich, you might wake up to find another man working your claim. armed and ready to defend it as his own. Disputes are settled not with lawsuits, but with fists, knives, or guns. There is a constant atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. The diet in the mining camp is even worse than what you had in town. The prices for food are astronomical. A single egg might cost the equivalent of a day's wages for a laborer back east. Your diet consists of the same old bacon, beans, and horte, but now it's more expensive and in shorter supply. Scurvy is rampant in the camps due to the complete lack of fresh fruit and vegetables. You see men with bleeding gums and loose teeth, their bodies giving out before their dreams do. The historical debate among academics often revolves around who actually got rich during the gold rushes. The answer, overwhelmingly, is not the miners. The vast majority of prospectors either found nothing and went home broke, or found just enough gold to pay for their exorbitant living expenses, essentially working for subsistence. The real fortunes were made by the merchants who supplied the miners, men like Samuel Brennan, who started the California gold rush by running through the streets of San Francisco shouting about gold while holding a bottle of it, made their millions not by panning, but by selling picks, shovels, and pans to the hopefuls at a 0% market. The gold rush was a lottery, and the house always won. After weeks of fruitless, back-breaking labor, a sense of despair begins to set in. The initial optimism of the camp has evaporated, replaced by a grim, sullen silence. Men begin to drift away, their shoulders slumped in defeat. You look at your raw hands, your aching back, and the pathetic pinch of gold dust that represents weeks of your life. The dream has crumbled into dust. You are just another fool who traded a life of predictable hardship for a fantasy of instant wealth, only to find a new and more profound level of misery. You pack your few belongings and begin the long, humiliating walk back to town, poorer and more cynical than when you left. You return from the failed gold rush. Your spirit is empty as your pockets, and re-enter the life of the town. But something is different. Or rather, you notice something that was always there, but which you were too distracted to fully appreciate. The noise. The town is never, ever quiet. It exists in a perpetual state of low-grade auditory chaos, a constant barrage of sounds that grates on the nerves and sinks into your subconscious. Forget the peaceful silence of the prairie. The moment you step onto the main street, you are immersed in a soundscape that is as jarring as the physical filth. The dominant sound is not human speech, but the noise of animals. Horses are the engines of this society, and their sounds are everywhere. The rhythmic clop of their hooves on the hard-packed earth, the jingle of their harnesses, the sharp whinny of a spooked horse, the low nicker as one greets another. The town's mule and dog steams add to the chorus with their braying and lowing. And then there are the dogs, a constant, yapping pack that seems to have a running argument with every passing wagon. Pigs grunt and squeal as they forage in the street. Chickens cluck and scatter underfoot. It is a barnyard symphony with no conductor. Then, there is the sound of nascent industry. The blacksmith shop is the loudest point in town, a source of constant, rhythmic clamor. The sharp, metallic clang of the hammer on the anvil rings out all day long, a sound you can hear from one end of town to the other. It is punctuated by the roar of the bellows as the smith heats his forge. Nearby, a new building is going up, and the air is filled with the rasping screech of handsaws cutting through raw lumber and the dull thud of hammers driving nails. There is no concept of noise pollution or zoning. This industrial noise is the sound of progress, and it is inescapable. The human sounds are just as chaotic. From the open doors of the saloons, you hear the familiar mix of tinny piano music, drunken singing, and the sudden, sharp roar of an argument. Merchants shout from their doorways, advertising their wares. Children, when they aren't in the one-room schoolhouse, run screaming and playing in the street. People don't talk. They shout to be heard over the general din. But it is the indoor sound, the sounds of humanity packed closely together, that are perhaps the most unsettling. The walls of your cabin, and of every building in town, are thin. They are made of single layers of wood or packed mud. There is no insulation, no sound priming. You live in a state of enforced intimacy with your neighbors. You can hear every argument, every crying baby, every domestic drama from the cabin next door as if it were happening in your own room. There is no privacy. A particularly unpleasant and little-known aspect of this soundscape is the noise of illness. In a town where disease is rampant, the sound of coughing is a constant, ambient backdrop. It is not the polite clearing of a throat. It is the deep, racking cough of consumption, tuberculosis, the wheezing of pneumonia, the whooping gasp of a child with croup. At night, when the other noises of the town die down, this symphony of sickness becomes more prominent. You lie in your bed and listen to the sounds of your neighbor's suffering, a grim and constant reminder of your own vulnerability. Historians who study the sensory experience of the past argue that people in the 19th century had a different relationship with noise. They were conditioned to a higher baseline level of ambient sound and had a greater tolerance for it. What we would consider an unbearable racket was simply the soundtrack of everyday life. The debate continues as to whether this made them tougher or simply caused a level of chronic, low-grade stress that we can't fully measure. Did the constant noise contribute to the irritability and sudden violence that characterized frontier life? It is an unanswerable but fascinating question. Even the silence, when it comes, is not peaceful. The deep silence of a winter night is not calming. It is menacing. It means the snow is so deep it has muffled the world. It is a silence that speaks of isolation and danger. The sudden silence in a crowded saloon is even worse. It is the silence that precedes a fight, a moment of collective breath holding before the explosion of violence. You try to find a moment of peace, perhaps by walking to the edge of town and looking out at the vast, open land. But even there, the sounds of the town follow you. The distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the faint barking of a dog. You realize that the town is a small, noisy island of human activity in a vast sea of silence. It is a place of constant friction, and that friction generates a noise that you can never truly escape. It seeps into your bones, a permanent part of your new existence. You learn to sleep through it, to talk over it, to live within it, but you know you will never feel truly quiet again. One day, a new sound begins to intrude on the familiar cacophony of the town. It is a distant, rhythmic banging and clanging, accompanied by the shouts of men speaking a language you don't recognize, often Irish or Chinese. A survey crew has come through, driving stakes into the prairie. The railroad is coming. This single event is the most powerful agent of change the West has ever seen. It will alter every aspect of your life, from the price of flour to the very concept of time. And it marks the beginning of the end for the Old West you've come to know. The construction is a monumental undertaking. You watch as thousands of laborers, organized with military precision, descend upon the landscape. They are a rough, transient army of men, living in temporary hell-on-wheels towns that spring up along the route, squalid, violent collections of tents, saloons, and gambling dens that are abandoned as soon as the railhead moves on. The work is brutal and relentless. You see teams of men grading the road up, digging through hillsides and filling in valleys with nothing but shovels, picks, and wheelbarrows. You see the tie hacks cutting down forest to produce the millions of wooden railroad ties needed. And you see the track layers working in a disciplined, assembly line fashion. A team of men lays down the ties. Another team drops the heavy iron rails into place, and the spikers drive the spikes in with a rhythmic, synchronized 1, 2, 3, 4. Clay. They can lay miles of track in a single day. A black iron's snake uncoiling across the pristine prairie. The scale of the operation is unlike anything you have ever witnessed. The arrival of the first train is a momentous occasion. The entire town gathers to watch the iron horse approach. It appears on the horizon as a smudge of black smoke, growing larger and larger until you can hear the sea huffing of its steam engine and the mournful wail of its whistle. It pulls into the newly built station, a terrifying, unbeautiful machine of steam, steel, and power. It is a physical manifestation of the industrial might of the East, arriving in your dusty little corner of the world. Almost overnight, your life changes. The general store, once a place of scarcity and exorbitant prices, is now flooded with goods. Suddenly, you can buy canned fruits and vegetables, fresh eggs shipped in refrigerated cars, and tools that are not hand-made in secondhand. The price of everything plummets. The long, dangerous, and expensive wagon journey that brought you here is now obsolete. The railroad makes the journey in a matter of days, not months. This has a profound effect on the town's economy. The old businesses that relied on the slow, overland freight, the wagon makers, the stable owners, find themselves out of a job. New businesses spring up around the railroad depot. The town becomes a shipping hub for cattle or wheat, connecting your small community directly to the giant markets of Chicago and the East Coast. The very nature of your work changes. Subsistence farming gives way to commercial agriculture. The era of the long cattle drive, with its iconic cowboys, begins to fade, replaced by the more efficient method of shipping cattle by rail. A little-known but profound change brought by the railroad is the standardization of time. Before the railroad, every town operated on its own local time, determined by the position of the sun. When it was noon in your town, it might be 10 in the town 30 miles to the east. This was fine for a slow-moving world, but it was a logistical nightmare for creating a railroad timetable. To solve this, the railroad companies pushed for the creation of standardized time zones in 1883. It was a radical idea that was initially resisted by many. The idea that some distant corporation could dictate what time it was felt like an intrusion. But the power of the railroad was irresistible. Your local, sun-based time is replaced by railroad time. Your life is now governed not by the natural rhythm of the sun, but by the relentless, mechanical precision of the clock. The historical debate about the railroad's impact is complex. On one hand, it brought prosperity, connection, and civilization to the West, accelerating its settlement and development at an unprecedented rate. It bound the country together, making the United States a true continental nation. On the other hand, it was an engine of destruction. It sped up the slaughter of the buffalo herds, as hunters could now easily ship the hides back east. It brought a new flood of settlers who encroached on the last remaining Native American lands, leading to the final, tragic Indian Wars. It was a tool of corporate power, with railroad barons like Leland Stanford and Collis Huntington wielding immense political and economic influence, often ruthlessly, as you stand by the tracks, feeling the ground tremble as a freight train rumbles past. You feel a sense of awe mixed with a strange kind of sadness. The West you knew, the isolated, difficult, and, in its own way, pure world of the frontier is dying. It is being replaced by something more connected, more modern, more efficient, but also something less wild, less free. The arrival of the iron horse has tamed landscaping. In doing so, has tamed you. The era of the pioneer is ending, and the era of the employee and the consumer is beginning. The future has arrived, and it smells of coal, smoke, and steel. The railroad brought more than just goods and people. It brought a more organized and formalized version of the outside world, including its legal system. The era of the justice of the peace holding court in a saloon and the martial buffaloing drunks in the street is slowly coming to an end. A proper courthouse, perhaps the first brick building in town, is constructed. A circuit judge, a man with actual legal training, begins to make regular visits. But this new, more structured justice is not always as fair or as impartial as it appears. One day, you find yourself on the wrong side of a dispute. Maybe a powerful rancher accuses you of rustling one of his cattle, or a merchant claims you owe him a debt you know you've already paid. You are summoned to the new courthouse. The experience is intimidating. The courtroom is a formal, imposing space with a high ceiling, a judge's bench, and a witness stand. It is designed to make you feel small and insignificant. The judge, in his black robes, seems like a figure from another world. He speaks in a language you barely understand, full of wherefores and heretofores. The real power in the room, you quickly realize, belongs to the lawyers. The wealthy rancher has hired the best lawyer in the territory, a fast-talking man in a smart suit who can't twist your words and make you sound like a fool. You, on the other hand, cannot afford a lawyer. You have to defend yourself. The proceedings are baffling. There are rules of evidence and procedure that you don't understand. When you try to tell your side of the story, the opposing lawyer shouts objection, and the judge agrees. Your testimony is disallowed on some technicality. The rancher's witnesses, who are all his employees, tell a polished, rehearsed story. Your own witnesses, your friends from the saloon, are dismissed as unreliable drunks. The trial is not a search for the truth. It's a performance, and you don't know your lines. This brings you face to face with the reality of frontier justice in its more mature phase. While it has the appearance of fairness, it is often heavily weighted in favor of the rich and powerful. The cattle barons, the mining companies, and the railroad corporations have the resources to hire the best lawyers, to influence the judges, and to ensure that the law works in their favor. The legal system, which is supposed to be a great equalizer, becomes just another tool for them to protect their property and consolidate their power. A little known but fascinating aspect of this system was the soiled of testimony. In many Western courts, there was an unwritten rule that the testimony of a prostitute, a soiled dove, was inadmissible or, at the very least, considered deeply unreliable, especially if it was used against a respectable man. This meant that these women, who were often witnesses to or victims of crimes, had no legal voice. A man could rob or assault a prostitute with little fear of being convicted on her word alone. It was a legal system with a built-in blind spot, rendering an entire class of people invisible and unprotected. This is also the era of the hanging judges. Figures like Isaac Parker, who presided over the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, became famous for the sheer number of men they sentenced to death. Parker saw himself as a righteous force, bringing law to a lawless land. In his 21 years on the bench, he sentenced 160 men to hang. While this was seen by many as a necessary evil to curb rampant crime, it also represented a form of justice that was swift, final, and left little room for error or appeal. The gallows became a symbol of this new, harsher form of order. The academic debate on this topic often centers on the transition from informal to formal legal controls. Was the new system, with all its flaws, truly an improvement over the arbitrary violence of the vigilante, committee, or the lone marshal? Some historians argue that it was, as it introduced at least a semblance of due process and predictability. Others argue that it simply replaced one form of arbitrary power with another, more insidious one. The violence of the mob was replaced by the structural violence of a legal system that was biased toward property, wealth, and a particular social class. You stand in the courtroom as the verdict is read. Unsurprisingly, it goes against you. You are ordered to pay a fine that you cannot afford, which will put you in debt to the rancher for years to come. You leave the courthouse feeling a new kind of helplessness. Before, you feared the lawlessness of the West. Now, you fear the law itself. You've learned that justice is not blind. In fact, it sees very clearly who has money and who does not. It is a bitter lesson, and it teaches you that even as the West becomes more civilized, the struggle for survival continues, just in a different, more complicated arena. The fight is no longer against the elements or outlaws, but against contracts, courts, and the fine print of the law. You survived the journey, the hunger, the violence, and the backbreaking labor. You've even survived the bewildering encounter with the formal legal system. But now, a different kind of threat begins to creep in, one that is silent, invisible, and lives entirely within your own mind. It is the profound, crushing weight of loneliness. This is not just a feeling of being alone. It's a deep, existential isolation that the vast, empty spaces of the West seem to amplify. Even though you live in a town, your social world is incredibly small and often superficial. Your interactions are transactional, buying goods, seeking work, making small talk at the saloon. The cautious, reserved nature of frontier society means that true, deep friendships are rare. Everyone is guarding their own interests, nursing their own private struggles. You are surrounded by people, yet you feel utterly disconnected. If you are on a homestead even a few miles outside of town, this feeling is magnified 1,000 times. You are an island of human activity in a sea of grass or desert. The silence is immense, broken only by the sound of the wind. You can go for weeks without seeing a soul outside of your own family. The landscape itself seems to contribute to the feeling. The vast, unchanging horizon, the immense sky, the sheer scale of the land can make you feel tiny, insignificant, and utterly alone. It is a beauty that can also be terrifying in its indifference. This isolation takes a heavy toll on your mental health. You find yourself talking to yourself, to your animals, just to hear the sound of a voice. Your thoughts begin to circle in on themselves, small worries growing into giant, obsessive fears. You become more irritable, more prone to bouts of deep melancholy or sudden, inexplicable anger. The lack of new stimuli, new faces, new conversations, creates a kind of mental starvation. This condition, as you've heard before, has a name: prairie madness. While not a formal medical diagnosis at the time, it was a widely recognized phenomenon. It particularly affected women, who were often more isolated on the homesteads than the men. The symptoms ranged from severe depression and social withdrawal to fits of weeping, anxiety, and, in the most extreme cases, acts of violence against themselves or their families. It was a desperate cry from a mind pushed beyond its limits by solitude. A strange and little-known aspect of this psychological struggle was the intense attachment people could form to objects. in the absence of human companionship. A photograph from back home, a piece of inherited furniture that survived the journey, or even a particular tool could take on an immense emotional significance. These objects became anchors, tangible links to a past and a world that felt impossibly distant. The loss or destruction of such an object could trigger a grief that was all out of proportion to its material value, because it represented the loss of a connection, a memory, a piece of one's own identity. You also feel a profound sense of cultural dislocation. You are a transplant from another place, trying to put down roots in alien soil. You miss the familiar landscapes of your old home, the food, the traditions, the easy camaraderie of a community where you belong. The West is not your home, not yet. It is a place you are trying to conquer, and it feels like it is conquering you in return. This feeling of being an outsider, even after years, contributes to the sense of isolation. The historical debate around prairie madness and the psychological toll of the frontier is ongoing. Some historians argue that the concept has been romanticized and exaggerated, pointing out that many people successfully adapted and thrived. They suggest that what was labeled madness might have simply been a normal human reaction to extreme hardship and grief. Others argue that the mental health crisis was very real and has been historically underestimated, a hidden epidemic that shaped the social and cultural development of the region. They analyze folk songs, diaries, and asylum records to piece together the story of this quiet suffering. You try to combat the loneliness. You make excuses to go into town, even when you don't need supplies, just to see other faces. You linger at the general store, trying to draw out a conversation. You go to the saloon, not for the bad whiskey, but just to be in a room full of noise and activity. But these are temporary fixes. The feeling follows you home, as you sit outside your cabin, watching the sun set in a blaze of color over the empty horizon. The loneliness washes over you. It is a feeling colder than any winter wind. You realize that the greatest challenge of the West may not be the physical struggle for survival, but the internal battle to keep your own mind from succumbing to the vast, soul-crushing emptiness of the land itself. It is a quiet war fought by countless individuals, a war with no witnesses and no monuments. In your small, isolated world, where direct experience is limited and trust is a rare commodity, you begin to realize the immense power of another force, information, or, more often, misinformation, how you are perceived by others. The stories that are told about you can be just as important to your survival as your ability to find water or build a shelter. Your reputation is your most valuable and most fragile asset. The primary source of news and gossip is the town's weekly newspaper, if it's lucky enough to have one. This is not a bastion of objective journalism. It is usually a one-man operation, run by an editor who is also the publisher, the reporter, and the typesetter. The paper is fiercely political and deeply personal. The editor uses his pages to promote his friends, praise the town's boosters, and mercilessly attack his enemies. The articles are a mix of reprinted news from Eastern papers often weeks out of date, local announcements, and editorials that are dripping with personal opinion and vitriol. You read the paper and learn that a local merchant is a pillar of the community, while his competitor is a scoundrel of the lowest order. You see disputes that were once private arguments now laid bare for the entire town to read, with one side's version of events presented as incontrovertible fact. The newspaper doesn't just report on the town's social hierarchy. It actively creates and enforces it. But most information doesn't travel through the press. It travels through gossip, the unofficial and far more influential news network of the frontier. Gossip spreads at the general store, over the back fence, at the church social, and especially in the saloon. It is fast, efficient, and completely unverifiable. A whispered rumor can destroy a person's reputation in a single afternoon. You learn to be intensely careful about what you say and who you say it to. A careless comment, an offhand joke, can be twisted and repeated until it becomes a damning indictment. If a rumor starts that you are a cheat at cards, no one will play with you. If people start to say you are lazy, no one will hire you. If a woman's virtue is questioned by gossip, she can be completely ostracized from respectable society. In a small community where everyone knows everyone else or thinks they do, social exile is a kind of death. A particularly strange and little-known way that reputation was managed was through the credit reporting systems of the time. Before formal credit scores, a person's creditworthiness was based entirely on their local reputation. A merchant in your town would keep his own mental or written notes on who paid their debts on time. He would also share this information with other merchants. National companies like the Mercantile Agency, a predecessor to Dun Bradstreet, would even hire local correspondents, often a lawyer or a postmaster, to write confidential reports on the financial stability and moral character of individuals in the community. These reports were shockingly personal, including details about a person's drinking habits, marital fidelity, and general standing. A bad report, based on nothing more than a neighbor's gossip, could follow you and prevent you from ever getting a loan or credit. The power of rumor can also be a matter of life and death. A false accusation of horse theft, the most serious crime on the frontier, could get you lynched by a vigilante mob before you ever have a chance to defend yourself. The law in this case is the court of public opinion, and its verdicts are swift and brutal. The historical debate around this topic often focuses on the function of gossip in premodern societies. Was it purely a destructive and malicious force, or did it serve a necessary social purpose? Some sociologists and historians argue that gossip was a key mechanism for enforcing social norms and values in a community that lacked strong, formal institutions. It was a way for the community to police itself, to punish those who deviated from the accepted rules of behavior. By participating in gossip, you were reinforcing your own membership in the community and helping to define its boundaries. You witnessed this power firsthand. A man who was once a respected member of the community is suddenly shunned. The whispers follow him down the street. People stop talking when he enters a room. You don't know the full story, and you never will. All you know is that he has been tried and convicted by the invisible jury of public opinion. This makes you deeply cautious. You guard your words. You maintain a polite but distant demeanor, and you try to remain as inconspicuous as possible. You realize that survival in the West is not just about physical toughness. It is also a social and psychological game. You must not only manage your resources, but also carefully manage your public self. In the small, claustrophobic world of the frontier town, your story, whether true or false, is who you are, and once it's written, it is almost impossible to erase. Years have passed since you first set foot in this dusty, chaotic land. You are older now, your face lined by the sun and worry, your hands permanently calloused. You have survived. You have endured the hunger, the sickness, the violence, and the loneliness. You look around your town, and you barely recognize it from the squalid camp it once was. The muddy main street is now graded and perhaps even has a few cobblestones. The flimsy wooden shacks have been replaced by more substantial brick and stone buildings. There is a proper church with a steeple, a school with more than one room, and the whistle of the train is now a familiar daily sound. The Wild West is fading, being paved over by something more stable, more predictable, more boring. This is the great, unglamorous truth of the frontier. Its ultimate goal was to eliminate itself. The entire purpose of the hardship and struggle was to create a place where hardship and struggle were no longer the defining features of daily life. The pioneers, in their desperate and often brutal quest for survival and prosperity, were laying the groundwork for a world in which their own rugged skills would become obsolete. The successful frontiersman was the one who helped bring about the end of the frontier. You see it in the people around you. The grizzled old prospectors and trappers who once seemed like titans of the wilderness now look out of place, like relics from another era. They sit on the porch of the general store, telling stories that the town's children, raised on canned goods and regular schooling, can barely comprehend. The new generation, born and raised here, doesn't know the terror of a starving winter or the taste of contaminated water. They take for granted the very things you fought so hard for. You become a part of this transformation. Your own small homestead or business, which you carved out with so much sweat and fear, is now a part of the established order. You are no longer a desperate newcomer. You are a respectable citizen. An old-timer. You have a vested interest in the town's stability, in the very laws and social norms that once felt so alien and oppressive. You worry about property values and taxes, not corrupt vigilantes. So why, then, did this brutal, filthy, and often miserable reality transform into the romantic myth of the American West? This is a question that historians continue to debate with great passion. Part of the answer lies in the dime novels and, later, the Hollywood movies that found a hungry audience for stories of heroism, freedom, and adventure. These stories simplified a complex reality, creating clear heroes and villains, and editing out the endless, grinding boredom and suffering. They gave a new, rapidly industrializing nation a powerful creation myth, a story of rugged individuals taming a continent through sheer force of will. Another part of the answer lies in human memory itself. As the survivors of the frontier era grew older, the harshest realities began to fade, softened by the nostalgic glow of time. The fear and the pain receded, and what remained were the stories of survival, the moments of camaraderie, and the pride of having endured. You yourself might find that you tell the story of the blizzard, but you leave out the part about the gnawing hunger and the despair. You tell the story of the saloon brawl, but you frame it as a moment of excitement rather than a terrifying, chaotic mess. You become a curator of your own past, selecting the memories that fit a more heroic narrative. A fascinating, and often overlooked, contributor to the myth was the Wild West show. Entrepreneurs like Buffalo Bill Cody created spectacular traveling shows that brought a theatrical, highly romanticized version of the West to audiences in the East and even in Europe. These shows featured real cowboys and Native Americans, including, for a time, the Great Lakota Eater Sitting Bull, but they were performing a scripted, sanitized version of their lives. They had trick shooting, staged Indian attacks, and dramatic reenactments of stagecoach robberies. It was history as entertainment, and it was incredibly effective at cementing the myth in the popular imagination. You walk to the edge of town, to the small cemetery on the hill. You look at the weathered wooden markers, many of them with names long since faded. Here lie the ones who didn't make it, the children who died of diphtheria, the women who died in childbirth, the men who were killed in mining accidents or who simply drank themselves to death. They are the silent majority, the forgotten casualties of westward expansion. Their stories are not told in the dime novels. They are the statistical reality that the myth was built to hide. Your journey is over. You have lasted far more than a day. You have built a life. But as you look back on the path you've traveled, you know the truth. The West was not won by heroes in white hats. It was settled by ordinary, desperate people who were tougher, luckier, and sometimes more ruthless than those who perished. It was a story written not just in glory and adventure, but in sweat, in tears, in filth, and in blood. And that is a far more complex and far more human story than the legend will ever admit. The sun has dipped below the horizon now, painting the sky in soft shades of purple and orange. The day's sharp edges have softened, and the sounds of the world are beginning to fade into a gentle hum. The story is over, but the journey continues, carrying you now from the dusty trails of the past into the soft, quiet landscapes of your own dreams. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, a quiet release as you drift further and further away from the waking world. The concerns of yesterday and tomorrow are distant echoes, fading into the peaceful silence that now surrounds you. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are ready for rest. Your mind is a calm, quiet river, flowing gently toward the deep, restorative ocean of sleep. Let the current carry you. There is nothing left to do now but breathe, and drift, and dream.